was penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million Dharmas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of love to Titans.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Here we are again. How nice. So, happy Juneteenth. It's Juneteenth today. Our newest, but also an old American holiday, sometimes called the Second Independence Day. I'm sure you know all this, but just to say that it commemorates the declaration on the 19th of June, 1865, by a major general in the victorious Union Army, ordering the enforcement in the state of Texas of the Emancipation Proclamation. So it marks the day when African American people first officially heard word that they were liberated from slavery. This liberation only applied to former slaves of the defeated Confederate States. There were still legally enslaved people in states that did not secede from the Union on June 19th, 1865, but a few months later in December, on the 6th of December, 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, and then there were no more enslaved people in the United States. So Juneteenth is a really glorious day for all of us. Here we can celebrate liberation from within, our hope for liberation from within, but also on this day we celebrate liberation from without. It is, to me, quite an unbelievable thing that human beings would have the idea that it would make sense for them to enslave one another. You can't even imagine how this idea crossed anyone's mind. And yet, slavery has been practiced all over the world. And it's even still exists in some forms that are really slavery. It still exists in the world, hard as that is to imagine. But there is something uniquely horrible about the slavery of African people in the United States. And that really terrible thing lies at the heart of the American national story. And you don't really understand America unless you understand and take completely to heart the story of the enslavement of the African American people. And we will never come to the end of contemplating this story, although I do hope that we will come to the end someday of the pain and misunderstanding that has been caused. The Buddha taught the noble truth of suffering. And if you are an American person and you want to understand the fullness of Buddha's teaching of suffering, you must understand the history of slavery in our country and the special place it has in shaping who and what we are. So it's good to be sitting on Juneteenth, right in the middle of this history, which, like all history, echoes in each one of us in the present. The other day, I was talking about Zhao, who responded to the monastic asking about the opening lines of Xinxinming, he said, "Why don't you recite the whole thing?" And the monastic couldn't remember the whole thing, and I couldn't remember it either. But I looked it up, and so it's long, but that's what I'm going to do this morning. I'm going to recite the whole thing for you, since it came up, and we will do what the monastic couldn't do. There's lots of English translations of the Xinxinming. There may be like dozens. I think it's the most translated into English text of any of the Zen materials. And this morning, I'm going to use Red Pine's translation. And Red Pine's translation has a really interesting introduction. In that introduction, Red Pine tells us that a Ming, as in Xinxinming, the first character, Xin, means trust or faith or confidence. The second character, Xin, means mind or heart. And Ming is a verse form. It's a Chinese verse form. Red Pine tells us a kind of epigram in the form of a rhymed couplet, which is very much like the ancient epigrammatic verses that you have in Greek literature. And he says that these epigrammatic couplets can stand alone, but sometimes they can be combined into 2 couplets, 4, 6, 8 couplets, and they all rhyme. And he said that the Ming, the verse form Ming, was unlike other poetry in Chinese that was meant to be sung or recited as well as written. The Ming was only for writing, and it would be embroidered on fabric, or it would be calligraphed in special decorative pieces, or it would be inscribed in stone that would be placed in monuments or other kinds of situations. And he said that the Ming never became a particularly important verse form in Chinese literature because it was kind of like greeting card poetry. It was usually like, very trite and cliched. And so people didn't particularly pay attention to it. But the Xinxinming, he says, was an exception to this rule, and that it was known and memorized, and many of the verses, were memorized and known commonly by all Chinese people, whether they were educated or not. Which means that by the time of Zhaozhou, many centuries after the composition of the Xinxinming, it is possible that when Zhaozhou and the monastics are quoting, they are not quoting esoteric Zen literature like we are quoting when we read the Xinxinming. They were probably quoting like Hallmark card cliches. So when one monastic says, "Isn't this a cliche?" he's not kidding around. It was a cliche. But of course, like all cliches, what are cliches? They're good wisdom gone awry. So, and this is a little, I know more than you need to know, but this is what fascinates me. Red Pine discovered that he couldn't find, where are the rhymes? There are no rhymes, even though the Ming is a rhymed form. So where are the rhymes? And a lot of people, when they translate this in their introduction, they say the Xinxinming is not rhymed. Because it isn't if you read it in contemporary Chinese, but Red Pine figured that it was rhymed. So he looked into this, and he found out that it's like, Old English in relation to modern English. Old Chinese is pronounced differently from contemporary Chinese. So Red Pine consulted various philological dictionaries, some of which were written as long ago as the 6th century, and he figured out the rhymes, which enabled him to figure out which couplets were supposed to go together in the Xinxinming. Some of them stand alone, but some of them are to be strung together. But he didn't try to rhyme them in English. That would be going a step too far. By the way, and this is an aside, if you read Old English, if you read Chaucer in the original, you immediately know you're not reading English as you know it. And people have a hard time understanding Old English unless they're trained in it, because the words are spelled differently and inflected differently, and sometimes there are words that you never heard of, or words you know that have different meanings. So you know it's different. But if you read Old Chinese, it's deceptive because it's very close to modern Chinese. It looks like modern Chinese. And up until the simplification of Chinese characters in the 20th century, the Chinese characters remained more or less the same throughout history, even though they were pronounced very differently and often had different meanings. So a contemporary reader of Chinese might be very deceived when reading an ancient text and think they understand it more than they actually do. And it's far worse if it's a Buddhist text, because Buddhist texts in Chinese are full of neologisms and transliterations and all kinds of technical terms. So a reader of Chinese cannot read Chinese Buddhist texts. It's a specialized thing. Redpine, as a final note from Redpine's introduction, he says that the entire text of the Xinxinming, we know exactly what it is. Usually, there's all kinds of problems with ancient texts. There's 60 different texts, and which one is the right one, and so on. But in this case, the entire text of the Xinxinming is carved, he says, into Seng-ts'an's monument, stone at Seng-ts'an's stupa at Shengu Temple, the mountain temple where Seng-ts'an's ashes are buried. So that's just the prelude to now I'm going to read the entire Xinxinming. Relax, it's long. This is Redpine's English. The way is not hard to find. Just avoid choosing. When preferences are gone, it's perfectly clear. The slightest distinction parts heaven and earth. To find it right now, stop taking sides. Fighting over sides is an illness of the mind. Until you understand the mystery, you still your thoughts in vain. It's perfect, like the void. Nothing missing, nothing extra. But because you grab and throw away, it doesn't look like that to you. Don't chase dependent things, and don't settle for emptiness either. In all embracing oneness, everything disappears completely. Staying still and trying not to move, you end up moving all the more. Can you hear? You're working on it. Okay, I'll work on it too. Why be trapped in dualities? Realize opposites are the same. Not knowing they're the same, you waste your time either way. Denying existence or non-existence, you trade one emptiness for another. The more you think or talk, the less sense you make. Once you stop thinking and talking, there's nothing that isn't clear. Returning to the root, you find the meaning. Chasing the light, you end up confused. Reflect on this right now. Better now than before it's all over. And whatever happens before it's all over comes from deluded views. No need to look for the truth. Just put an end to views. Don't cling to dualities and don't seek them out. Once a yes or no appears, confusion clouds the mind. Two exist because of one. let one go as well. As long as no thought arises, nothing is wrong with anything. Nothing wrong and no things, no thoughts and no thinking. The actor disappears with the stage. The stage disappears with the actor. The stage exists because of the actor. The actor exists because of the stage. Realize both of them are one and the same emptiness. One emptiness containing two, altogether 10,000 things. If you don't distinguish fine or coarse, how can you be biased? The way at heart is all embracing. It isn't hard or easy. Those with doubts or narrow minds take longer the more they try. Grab it and you lose perspective. You're sure to go astray. Let it be the way it is. It doesn't leave or stay. Accepting your nature, being one with the way, you will know no discontent. Controlling your thoughts, opposing the truth, you'll sink into negativity. Exhausting yourself in negativity, what's the point in leaving home? Regardless of the path you take, give the dust of sensation no thought. Giving the dust of sensation no thought. This is the same as enlightenment. The wise do nothing. The fools get all tangled up. Nothing differs from anything else. But deluded people love to cling, objectifying the mind, to cultivate the mind. What a great mistake. Peace and disorder arise from delusion. Enlightenment includes neither bad nor good. Each and every duality is due to measures or scales. Why bother trying to grab a dream, an illusion, a flower floating in the sky, profit and loss, right and wrong? Let them go right now. When you're no longer asleep, dreams vanish by themselves. When you don't differentiate, everything is real. What is real at heart is a mystery. Be quiet and forget about reasons. View everything the same. Return to letting things be. When reasons are gone, what use are examples? Be still and movement ceases. Move and stillness ends. If neither is right, how can one be good? Go beyond all limits. Don't follow patterns or rules. Focus on equanimity. Stop whatever you're doing. Get rid of lingering doubts. Put your trust in samadhi. Let nothing at all remain, nothing that leaves a trace. Let the empty light shine. Don't try to exert your mind. This isn't the domain of reason, much less perception or feeling. In the Dharma realm of suchness, neither self nor other exists. If you're ready, right now, just say, not two. Not two is all inclusive. There is nothing it doesn't contain. The sages of every world all achieve this understanding. An understanding that transcends time. A thought that lasts 10,000 years. There is nowhere it isn't present. Wherever you look, it's there. It's smaller than small and bigger than big. Forget dimensions and states. It's bigger than big and smaller than small. Don't look for boundaries or edges. It exists but doesn't. It doesn't but does. What isn't like this? You have to let go. It's one in all things. It's all things in one. If you can be like this, there's no problem just going on. Trust the mind, free of dualities. Free of dualities, trust the mind. It's where language can't go. It's neither past, present, or future. So that's the Xinxinming. And you can see where it's full of little, you could take 2 lines and just spend the rest of your life appreciating the 2 lines. And it's strung together, many aphorisms, epigrams like that. I don't think usually in Dharma talks anybody ever reads the entire Xinxinming. Usually they write whole books, commenting on it. But there's no use commenting on it because I think it's very clear exactly what it's saying. And this is the point about Chan language. There's nothing, I don't think, anything in Chan and Zen that is different from anything in the Buddha Dharma anywhere. But the style of the language is different. And in Chan, the language is so direct, straightforward, clear, no complications. But since it embraces paradox, there is paradox in Indian Buddhism, but Chan specializes in paradox. And the thing about paradox is it's paradoxical. You can't grasp it. So therefore, you think you don't understand. But I am pretty sure that you do understand far better than you think you do. So I'm not going to give a commentary on all of that, but there's a few things I want to emphasize. First, I thought about the lines, several lines where he talks about it's easy, or it's not easy or hard. And this reminds me of the story of Layman Pong and his family. I believe it might be the only example in all of Chan literature of an enlightened family. Daddy and mommy are both enlightened, and the daughter is also enlightened, and they have Zen dialogues together all the time. So this is one of them. One time the layman was sitting in his cottage because they gave away all their possessions, and they put him on a boat and they sunk the boat. And somebody said, well, why didn't you just give them away to other people? And they said, well, it's a problem for me. Why would I want to pass my problem on to someone else? Anyway, they lived in a little thatched cottage, the 3 of them. And one day the layman was in his cottage studying the sutras, and he muttered, difficult. It's like trying to scatter 10 measures of sesame seeds all over a tree. And his wife, Mrs. Pong, heard this and said, no, it's easy. It's just like touching your feet to the ground when you get out of bed. And their daughter, Lingjia, was nearby, and she said, no, neither difficult nor easy. On the 100 grass tips, the great master's meaning. That's beautiful, don't you think? Those wonderful metaphors. That's a great practice, by the way. When you get up in the morning and you get out of bed and put your feet on the ground, see if you can be there. Use your feet on the ground as a way to wake up every morning. Maybe you noticed that, as I was saying the other day, referencing equanimity, saying that really the Xinxinming is about equanimity, that he says that in the poem. He says, focus on equanimity. And as I was saying the other day, equanimity really means to see clearly, to see with equality, without prejudice. So let all your opinions and ideas fall away, because they do not touch the true reality of things. They're just about you and what you think you want. But they're not about the reality of things. You want this, you want that. You think this, you think that. Does it really matter? Things come and go. Have you noticed lately? Things come and go. Why not let them? He also offers a very useful little technique. I think this is the only technique you need. He says, if you're ready right now, just say not to. This is a practice which you can really do. Every time you notice you're confused or suffering, instead of going on and on churning it, be ready right now. Means be present right now. Train yourself as soon as the mind goes that way to come back to your breath, come back to your body, and say to yourself the words not to. Actually, don't say those words. I don't think those are the best words. Maybe in Chinese. But in English, I think if you say not to, that becomes immediately heady and you're already philosophizing. So don't say not to. Maybe it's better to say, what is this? Right now, what is this? Or this is it. Some words to bring you back and get you off of that churning suffering. Bring you back to just being present with equanimity. Of course, it's not to say, even though it kind of sounds like he's saying this, but there's nothing wrong with thinking. Thinking is a great thing. Birds fly and sing, fish swim, human beings think. It's wonderful. We're not trying to stop thinking here. I was talking to someone about Dogen's think not thinking. And they were practicing this. And they said, think not thinking, no thinker. That's great, right? That's right. No thinker, just thinking. And that's the trouble with thinking. We take it so personally, right? We think, this is my thinking. No, it's just thinking. Then it's okay. Not painful anymore. He says, quoting, controlling your thoughts is opposing the truth. And then you sink into negativity. So you probably noticed that if you try to control your thoughts, you try to let go of them, you get frustrated. You get negative. Oh no, I'm such a terrible meditator. It's not going well. Don't try to control anything. Just breathe. Just sit up. Just be there. Thoughts? No thoughts? Just be there. That's the main thing. To be present, to be there. To let presence dawn in you like the sun comes up and it's dawn. Nobody's trying to make it dawn, you know? It's just dawn. So I'm thinking of this very bizarre idea of being present, presence. What an odd word. What an odd idea. Because aren't we always present? How can you be alive and not be present? Sometimes I say to people about Zazen, that's what Zazen is. It's the practice of being alive, being present. Presence is just another name for being alive, and it's also just another name for Buddha nature. We all have Buddha nature, the sutra says. And we're all present the whole time we're alive. But we all know that somehow we can feel absent in our presence. And sometimes we can feel completely present. Our attachment, our rejection, our convoluted, self-centered thinking, driven by self-worry, self-clinging, self-doubt, self-denigration. This is what Seng-ts'an is harping on over and over again in his poem. This is what he wants you to see. Because all that removes us from the presence that will be there anyway, if only we will stop putting up all kinds of barriers against it. Once we allow all this confusion to simply float away, which it will do, which it wants to do naturally, we are free. And we are Buddha. And every single thing that we do in practice, bowing, chanting, going to Doksan, listening to the Dharma talk, sitting in Zazen, washing the dishes, eating a meal, driving a car, having a conversation with somebody, everything we do in our lives is our practice. And all of it is there for us to remember our presence, to enter our presence as fully as we possibly can. That's why we've been given this human life. But it's even funnier than that, to me anyway, because there's no presence. What presence? There's a big absence right in the middle of presence. People say the present moment. What present moment? The present moment is another concept, it's another idea. Try finding the present moment. You never find it. Anything you find is not the present moment, because it passes away as soon as you recognize it. So this presence that we experience, that we are living, is very profound. It's not just have a wonderful time, life is great. It's more than that, or maybe a lot less than that. That's why in the poem, several times, Seng-ts'an refers to presence as a mystery. The present moment is beyond the present moment. The present moment is ungraspable, it is unknowable. And this is the amazing paradox. Even so, our whole body and mind is constantly in touch with it. That's why it's so fruitless and frustrating to try to get it, or to think you got it, or didn't get it, or are successful at being present, or unsuccessful at being present. That's just a bunch of extra crazy, dumb thinking, which we are all perfectly entitled to. Because we come by it honestly. But let's just not believe it so much, right? Let's just not believe it so much. The only important thing is to take this step and then the next step right in front of us. Trust the mind, free of dualities, as Seng-ts'an writes. Trust the not knowing mind The mind that doesn't control anything, but is free to depend on everything, moment by moment. The Dharma is music. It seems like it's mostly words and ideas. The Xinxinming itself is a bunch of words and ideas. They seem to be saying something, but really, it's music. You can't really understand music. Actually, you can kind of understand the words of the Xinxinming, but not until our whole body, our whole mind, our whole heart embraces do we really understand what these words are trying to say, what the melody is trying to show us. And I think it's really interesting. I think we're lucky in a way that we're studying the Dharma in a foreign language. Not only a foreign language, several foreign languages. On the one hand, it is completely ridiculous. How would anybody possibly understand anything when they don't know the language? How could you understand a single word? In fact, it's 100% guaranteed that we will misunderstand the teachings, since we don't know the language in which they're written. Any person who could actually read the Xinxinming in Chinese is bound to understand it better than any of us who can't. But this might be an advantage for us, because when you can't understand the words, maybe you can hear the music better. I was listening to the magic flute. There's an English magic flute. I like the German one better, because I can't understand it. I hear the music better. I'm not distracted by the words. Maybe you have noticed, and this is one of the beautiful things about practice, sesshin practice. You hear the Dharma talk really well because you have been sitting. Sitting is the best way to tune your ears to the music of the Dharma. You really hear it. You hear the music, the truth music. Afterward, I think Tim actually said this. Afterward, somebody says, like, what was in the Dharma talk? I have no idea. I don't remember a word. But that's good. Because whatever you could explain to somebody else, including to somebody else that you call me, you, it wouldn't be it. But the music changes you. The music re-engineers your heart. And therefore, it literally re-engineers the whole world around you. I think Tim was talking about this yesterday. Wasn't he talking about change your mind, right? Didn't you? Someday, yeah, I think he doesn't remember either. But I think change your mind came up, at least in my dream of Tim's Dharma talk. And I think maybe it was from something Dogen said about change your mind. And it reminded me that years ago, maybe they still do this, I'm out of touch, but years ago, Tricycle magazine used to sponsor a day in Central Park in the springtime called Change Your Mind Day. And different Buddhist teachers would sit up on a platform and people would be sitting around on picnic blankets. And there would be different Dharma talks and meditations and people would listen. Change your mind. Change the world. This is literally true. It is the most obvious and therefore hard to notice thing ever. You make the world you live in. You construct the world you live in with your mind. Everyone, therefore, is living in a different world. That's true. So what's the real world? Good question. Change your mind, change the world. He says, the stage exists because of the actor. The actor exists because of the stage. And this is a grave matter. I pretty much every day, I'm not much during sesshin, but when I'm not in sesshin every day, I am thinking about the terrible wars we now have in our world. And I care about them a lot. And they give me a lot of anguish. And people are fighting and killing one another because they are screaming to one another, the world you live in is destroying the world that I live in. That is why I have to destroy your world so that I can live in mine. People are not fighting over a little bit of land or who's in charge of which government. Worlds are clashing. I am always trying to restrain myself from saying this because I say it so often. But this idea of being present in time is so bizarre. You know, how is it possible? We're here and then we're not. How could that be? How could it be that everything is always different and always the same? So every time that I come to Samish and I walk into this room, I really have the feeling that I never left, that I have always been in this room with you. I have been doing this day of sesshin my entire life. And it began even before I was born. And I will always be doing it. That's how it feels. Someday, soon, my body will not appear here in this room in the Samish sesshin. And people will think, oh, wait, he used to be here so many times, but not anymore. That's too bad. But that will never be true. I will never not be here. Seng-ts'an writes, an understanding that transcends time, a thought that lasts 10,000 years. 10,000 years in Chinese means forever. And I feel like this also when I go down to Tassajara, our monastery in the deep mountains that I'm sure many of you know about and many of you have visited. Kathy and I lived there for years. We lived there first together, and then we left and came back with our little babies, and we lived there with them for years until they had to go to school from the time they were infants. And then we had to move away. But then I went back many, many times as abbot of Zen Center to lead Ango periods. And after I was abbot, I would go back every year for retreats in the summers. And I always remember, I will never forget, the first time that I visited there, I was awed by the deep mountains, the steep canyon walls, the coyote bush, the yucca plants, the snakes, all the little animals. And I thought, everything has its way of practice. Everything knows exactly what to do. It has its way. And I heard the sound of the Densho bell and the Han. And I saw the monastics walking back and forth to and from the Zendo. And I could feel the silence in my body. And I thought to myself, this is the human equivalent of the natural order of things. This is the way people can live together in peace and harmony, generation after generation, just the same way that the animals know what to do, generation after generation, and they can't even explain it to each other, but they know what to do. And every day I put on my robe, the same robe worn by our Indian and Chinese and Japanese ancestors thousands of years ago. And when I put it on, I think, what year is this? What day is this? What world is this? What life is this? We were at Tassajara again. We actually, after many decades, we led Ango again. And Alson was the Shuso in 2019. And then we haven't, because then COVID, and then we haven't been back there since 2019. And we went just this May. And I arrived there, and it was 1972. It was 1272. It was 772. It was 2172. The mountains, the stream, the music was the same. And I couldn't help it. I wrote a poem, and I close with my poem. Returning to this place of long ago, I find things that finished have barely begun. People crossing streets, we see them, their faces that is, but do we see them, and how and who is it we really reflect as we gaze into sinister mirrors? There are so many sighs to sigh. One gives up sighing altogether at this point. And just gets on with it. This last segment of the journey through bushes and brambles, the final tour of the coasts and castles, food and all its remnants day by day, and every smiling face returns from former faces its salient features as a face of one's own. Again, fleeting, as from the window of a train rushing by the little house you used to live in. And there you are again, in this graver now, waving. And the stars are overhead, again at night, through the clouds and ever-present crisscrossing trees. Can this be the same person? Or does the past become an echo of the destruction of today? They say limits are arriving, but I am not so sure. In a square, there are many circles. And in my eyes, floaters that make the picture that much more surreal. This is a very surreal life we're living. We don't know what's going on at all. So all our worries are misplaced, every single one of them. So let's enjoy our sesshin, and let's remember always to be kind, each one to ourselves and to one another. Thank you, as always, for listening to my eternal Dharma talk.
Needs are numberless. I am able to say